Now, the eyes of the world, of course, currently focused on the Middle East, but the war in Ukraine is also raging on. Russia's military began the year by launching some of its most intense strikes on Ukraine's cities since the invasion nearly 2 years ago. Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelenskyy says his country has been hit by hundreds of missiles in recent days. Russia, for its part, accuses Kyiv of shelling the border city of Belgorod, killing at least 25 civilians there. Despite the intensified hostilities, observers say there's barely any movement on the front line. Let's take a look at why the war has bogged down.
These are images from the Telegram channel of Ukraine's 3rd Assault Brigade. They show a slow and brutal war between Russia and Ukraine, high in casualties and slow in movement. The front line in Ukraine's east has hardly budged. Some military analysts say the current stalemate is ultimately to Russia's advantage. Russian forces are dug in behind a fortress of tank traps, minefields, and other obstacles. The red on the map marks Russian positions along the front. Satellite images indicate that Russian troops are reinforcing these areas. More than 8 million landmines are estimated to be buried there. The Ukrainian army has not been able to find a way through, and they're dependent on supplies of Western munitions. These have been slow in coming. Ukrainian soldiers have to ration 155mm shells, a key munition in their defense.
The dilemma is that Ukraine only ever gets what it needs to turn an asymmetrical situation into a symmetrical one, but too little to actually drive the Russians to enter into negotiations.
Another winter of war is settling in over Ukraine. Like the last one, its cities and infrastructure are under air attack. American-made F-16s are on their way, but Ukrainian pilots still need training. Ukraine hopes they can challenge Russian fighters in the sky. On the ground, Ukraine's air defense is in better shape. SAMPT units from France, Iris-T from Germany, Patriot from the US. Anti-aircraft tanks, such as the German Gepard, can fend off drone attacks. Both sides are making extensive use of these uncrewed aerial vehicles.
And if you see now that each side knows what the other is doing because of the use, especially of many of these drones, we have what many have referred to as the future so-called transparent battlefield. That is, whatever happens on the battlefield, each side immediately has an idea of what's happening.
For Ukraine to take the offensive, it will need more weapons from its Western partners. Otherwise, Russia's numerical superiority has a good chance of simply waiting out the stalemate.
For more analysis on this, let's cross to Kyiv and bring in Liubov Tsybulska. She's an expert in hybrid warfare who runs a military consultancy and has advised the Ukrainian government. Now, you have described your expertise as Russian hybrid threats. Before we get into the details, can we brush up on the terminology? What does hybrid warfare entail?
Thank you so much, first of all, for having me here today. When we speak about hybrid warfare, we speak about the whole complex of interference, including disinformation, cyber attacks, economical interference, political corruption, and other means.
So what are the main of these non-military threats that Ukraine is facing currently?
Of course, we still face very different, vast cyber attacks, but I would say that disinformation is the major threat for our population if we are not speaking about military means, because Russia is trying to demoralize our society, to make us basically to surrender, to spread fatigue, not only within our society, but also within our partners, our allies across the world.
Can you give us an example of what Moscow is doing to disseminate misinformation and how this may be risking Ukraine's national security?
For instance, in Ukraine, we have a lot of different messengers where people exchange information, for instance, Viber or Telegram. And Telegram is absolutely not secure messenger. It's very easy to get there, and it's very easy to run different Telegram chats or groups where people take news from. And unfortunately, in Ukraine, Telegram is the first source of information for our people. And these Telegram chats or Telegram channels, they are anonymous. The Telegram doesn't have any security standards, any community standards. So basically, anyone can run them. And there are a lot of disinformation there. On Viber, there is a different type of interference. For instance, just one simple example, Ukrainians get there in different chats. For instance, people who lost their loved ones, those who were killed or those who were missed on the battlefield. And people get together, and it's very easy to infiltrate those Viber chats. And I participated in some of these chats, and I saw that some unknown figures were trying to provoke people to go and protest, to go against authority or against the government. For instance, to go and block routes where Western weapons coming on. So there are a lot of different types how Russian disinformation machine can interfere Ukrainian society and demoralize it, to make people think that we are losing, or to make people think that our government is not protecting us.
So, of course, as you say, the Ukrainian government is also engaging in these tactics. And it's interesting what you said, because it's about controlling the narrative of this war. Who would you say is more skillful in controlling this narrative, Russia or Ukraine?
I would say that Ukrainian government controls the narrative, simply because we understand where the threat is coming from. We feel it every day. Just the last, 5 days, Russia launched more than 500 missiles and attack drones on us. So it's easier for us to understand where it's Russian disinformation when we know, when we feel physically the threat. But in other countries, in the societies of our allies, sometimes it's not that easy, because there are a lot of different narratives that Russia spreads. For instance, narratives about Ukrainian corruption or Ukrainian refugees. All these narratives make people feel that the war lasts too long and it's time to end it. And some people initiate some peace plans or some peace negotiations. Us is not an option for now, because we still have thousands of Russian troops on our territory. And the main precondition for the peace talks would be getting out Russian troops, Russian forces from our territory.
And let's get the view now from Kyiv. We are joined by Ivanna Klympush-Tsintsadze. She is a member of Ukraine's parliament and chairs the Committee on Integrating Ukraine into the EU. Welcome to DW, and thank you so much for your time. A new year has begun.
Good evening.
The front line looks much the same as it did last year. What has this done to the spirit of the Ukrainian public and perhaps to your own?
Well, definitely, this is a hard year that we are entering, and we all understand this. And it has started also with this massive attacks of the Russian Federation over the whole country, and especially on the capital, especially on some bigger cities, and our infrastructure and civilian targets. I cannot tell you that this is breaking in any way our mood or our resolve. It definitely is only making us even more ready to ensure that we have to have an upper hand in this particular war. But this will be impossible without the support of our partners. Even if Ukraine is working right now on increasing its own production of the possible weaponry, is trying to ensure that it is repairing much of the military equipment on the ground, and this is showing, I think, incredible efficiency of using the weaponry that we are receiving from our partners. But I think the dripping type of deliveries of these weapons are making it much harder for our military to plan the operations and to be successful in them.
Let's pick apart on a couple of things that you just mentioned there. I'd like to begin first on the military front, in particular with personnel, because, your soldiers have been fighting for close to 2 years now. It has been acknowledged that mobilization is an issue, that morale is perhaps suffering. The Ukrainian military proposed mobilizing some 500,000 Ukrainians and Ukrainians abroad. They were called on to return home to fight. I'd just like to ask you, how big is that challenge in that regard, and what do you make of the government's plan to address it?
Well, the government has suggested, has filed to the parliament the new law on mobilization. We are actually expecting that maybe the president of Ukraine, as this is his direct responsibility, would file his initiative, rather, to try to deal with mobilization. We do understand that this is a necessity. We do have to support our troops in also helping some of them that have been fighting on the front line for this full 2 years since the start of the full-scale invasion. We have to give them the possibility to recuperate, to get some rest, and to be able to fight with new force. That is not an easy task, but I'm sure that we will find the solution how to address that and how to ensure that Ukraine has kind of fresh support of the armed forces. But again, the armed forces is not the only question at this moment. The question is also the support of our partners, and the question marks that we are still waiting to hear on the decision of the U.S. Congress with regard to further military and financial support of Ukraine. I think also the other issues that are connected with the European Union peace facility that has been blocked by Hungary at this particular moment is also another question mark. And I think that we all have to understand if Ukraine is defeated by the Russian Federation, God forbid, that means that the West will be having to deal with the consequences for its own security. And I think that we are altogether underestimating the challenges and the risks and the threat that the Russian Federation is actually posing to the whole globe, not exclusively for Ukraine.
You mentioned the further funding that is, up for decisions, up for votes, including that in the United States. Your president has worked very hard to secure more funding, more advanced weapons from those partners, those supporters. Just tell us, are you worried by what you see going on internationally? Many have said that there's a display of waning support, and you've discussed Ukraine trying to ramp up its own domestic production of weaponry, but practically all the experts have acknowledged that you're a far way away from being able to do so at a scale that would replace what your partners are providing you.
I think it would be naive not to be worried. I think that from my perspective, the decisions should have been already made because it's not exclusively in the national interests of Ukraine, but this is in the national interests of the United States. It is in the national interests of any Western country that is declaring its adherence to basic values, to respect to human life, to respect to the international law, and expects being protected by these international agreements that are still remaining exclusively on the paper, as we see, and are being disregarded by the Russian Federation. So yes, we are worried, and at the same time, we are, I think, trying to find rational arguments that would also speak to the politicians, would speak to the societies, would get the understanding of why this is important, not exclusively for us. The price and the price tag would be much higher if the West would show its weakness by not supporting Ukraine, because that would be a go-ahead, a green light for all others who are looking at the Russian experience in this war against free world.
I just want to ask you very quickly before we go, where you do see a ray of hope, any glimmers out there in particular. Maybe you want to highlight something that's in your own portfolio. As we mentioned, you're chairing the Committee on Integrating Ukraine into the EU.
Well, definitely, we are grateful for the decision on opening the negotiations with Ukraine and Moldova. And I think that this is a historic and geopolitical act by the European Union that creates hope that the space of security, the space of democracy, the space of prosperity will be enlarging, and that such autocracies, such dictatorships as Russian one, will not have a say in the future of the European continent.
And let's bring in defense analyst Mike Martin. He joins us from London. So, Mike, I want to start by asking you about that point that was just made in the report about Ukraine being a so-called transparent battlefield, because both sides know what the other is doing. Is it fair, therefore, to say that drones and other high-tech weaponry are part of the reason that no progress is being made on the front line?
Absolutely. And it's not just drones, it's other aerial systems and satellites as well as capabilities to determine whether the other side's using radios to listen into communications. All of this enables both sides to build up a very good intelligence picture, which means that it makes this truism of war, which is that defense is much more difficult, much easier than attack. All of these technologies mean that is doubly true, and it leads to stalemate that we're seeing now.
According to the latest information that you have, Mike, where are the current major flashpoints on the front line, if any? Where are the opportunities?
Well, so this is what's really interesting. Absolutely. Well, this is what's very interesting at the moment. Throughout the war, we've seen, Kyiv was a big battlefield, then Kherson, then Bakhmut in the east. And actually, we've hit a situation now where, and you referenced it in your report, the Russians have really dug in and fortified almost all the way along the front line. And that has meant that there is no particular area where it's easy. There are no opportunities for Ukraine to break through. They tried very hard in the south last year to break through south towards Tokmak, but they failed to do that. And because, again, these defenses coupled with the technology that we've just been talking about, is there are no particular areas of flashpoints, as you say, and the conflict really is a low, grinding, backwards and forwards, a few meters here and there in several places along the front line.
Mike, can we just drill down into one of these technologies? And I mean, this is something that you and I have spoken about before, so I just want to follow up with you. The use of drones in particular. How are you seeing this? Are you expecting it to shift things away from the trench fighting even more going forward toward the increased use of these unmanned aerial vehicles and the like?
Well, I think there's two broad types of drones that we're seeing used. One are the ones that Russia is using, predominantly from Iran, these cheap Shahed drones that they're using for air attacks, mostly against Ukrainian civilians. But there's another type of drone warfare going along where a lot of cheap commercial drones, perhaps you and I could get them on Amazon, and they're slightly fitted out and changed to enable them to operate often by Ukrainian forces, and they're able to give a platform for people to view what's going on in a trench or to perhaps to spot artillery. But I think, to your point, it's not an either or. It's not drones or trenches. It's both. And what we're seeing in the Ukraine war is a really interesting mix of some of the oldest technologies, digging a trench. Ukrainian trench in 2024 is no different to a trench in France in 1914. But it's also mixed with this high technology of these drones with video cameras that are able to target artillery.
Mike, can you put all of this into the big picture for us? Because, I mean, ultimately, it's been said by many experts that Russia is fighting a so-called war of attrition. They have the advantage when it comes to numbers, manpower, for example. If they were to win by waiting Ukraine out, how long do you think that might be? How many winters can Ukraine survive in the current environment, the current conditions, support waning from their partners, for example?
Well, how long Ukraine will last does depend almost entirely on the amount of support they get from the West. So it's impossible to give you an exact answer to that because, as you know, at the moment, the US is debating a new package. It's being tied to domestic political concerns in the US as to whether that will go through. There's also a big question about whether Europe will step up to fill any void from the Americans. But what I can say is last year, 2023, was the year that Ukraine had to make progress on the battlefield, and they failed to do so. And now we're in 2024. It's a year of lots of elections, but most importantly, the US presidential election. And at the moment, the polls, it seems to be a very close race between Trump and Joe Biden. And of course, if Trump wins, we know what Trump thinks about NATO. He thinks it's pointless. And we also know what he thinks about the Ukraine war and about Russia. So if Russia can wait this out, i.e. continue the stalemate that there is now until the US presidential election, then I think that the story of the Ukraine war will be very different from what it is now and what it was last year.
So many different factors at play, so much yet to be seen. Mike Martin putting it all into context for us. Thanks for your analysis.
Thank you.